So good afternoon, all the invited guests and all the audience consisting from different institutes. I had students from TIS are also there, our students and maybe from other institutes. I welcome once again on behalf of ITM to all of you present over here. And she has already spoken about our institute, but still the institute we are in currently, this particular campus, it caters to PhD course, and that is the flagship program of ITM through which ITM actually has passed through all these last 32 years in Indian educational space. And till now we have carved a niche in higher education space. The specialization we offer are starting from marketing, finance to all the emerging specializations like fintech, digital marketing transformation, business analytics. So all these areas we have actually explored even in 2019. Besides that, we have specialization in international business, which primarily deals with international relations and also business management. Now to talk about, yes, she already has spoken that yes, I'm expert in conflict management, so I should definitely highlight a little bit on what is that and why it is essential. So conflict is inevitable. So wherever there are more than one person, I believe there will be conflict. Only when we are alone, self, still there is conflict in thoughts between, even if one person is there, but still that is limited. But the moment another person comes, then conflict of interest and there is conflict. So then how do we solve that? And today's youth, which is restless, and always they go for a word instant gratification. So that instant gratification further talks about more, and it talks in volume about how conflict arises. So conflict arises because A and B both want the same thing at the same time. So we do not have any patience to wait. So that is what, if there is one person who has to be topper of the class, then 60 students are competing for the same position. So automatically there will be real competition and it leads to conflict of interest and further conflict. Similarly, it is in workplace also, promotion, increment, everywhere resources are limited and people competing for that are unlimited or more in numbers compared to we are in India, even surpassing China. So that's what the major reason for conflict, that population is high, and in comparison to that, even if every growth indicator says that India is prospering, but still there is resource crunch. So conflict will be every time there. Now how do we solve, and should we solve that? So definitely we should solve. So there is a saying that where conflict ends, peace starts. So peace is something which is inevitable for your productivity, for your increased proportion of output versus input, which is a concrete measure of defining productivity. So for that matter, conflict can be of different type. It can be functional, it can be dysfunctional. So we have a particular diagram which says that, so like a product life cycle, it comes to a top or it matures and then it declines. So similarly stress, this conflict, everything has a point where it actually matures. Beyond that it is negative. So little bit of conflict is essential at a workplace also, because unless there is conflict or difference of opinion, we don't grow. We think that what I am doing, I am perfect, or what she is doing, she is perfect. But if somebody else says that no, there is something which we can add, so there is a conflict of opinion. But I think those kind of conflict is called functional conflict and positive conflict. That enriches an organization. So those kind of conflict should be there in the organization, irrespective of there is a ego class or ego hurt. So that's a temporary phenomena. But for the organization, it is really must. But now, while taking youth and a perspective of youth where it comes, they fight for small things also. They fight over the cereal they like, they fight over the movie they see, they fight over the food they eat, so they fight over the dress they wear. So these are the things which are not very relevant for our life to grow or even sustain. So for that matter, we need to understand the basics of conflict, that why I am into a conflict. Is there any reason behind my conflict that I am actually bothering for? So for that matter, the roots of conflict to be seen and also relevance of conflict to be examined, and every point of time it has to be, there has to be introspection. For what I am spending my time, for what I am thinking of this kind of conflict region. So once I think all of us who introspect that, then conflict will be minimal. And if you are doing for something for the interest of any bigger thing, then you should never feel guilty also. You should think that yes, I have done the right, even if it is not, it may hurt 1%, 2%, but it will in general will go for the growth of the institute or maybe the company or for the organization. So that is what with a few words like this. So this is a wonderful topic to talk about, that conflict resolution. And conflict resolution, the anybody having little bit of theory base of human resource management will agree that there are different ways that we can actually go for reducing conflict. It starts from competition, goes via avoiding, then goes towards collaboration, accommodation and compromise. So collaboration and compromise, these are the kind of thing that actually, or accommodation even, where we are sacrificing something or we are trying our best to merge the interest. So the moment I think of merging the interest, then everything else is taken care. But the moment I think that no, my interest should be superior than the other, then there is a competition. And many point of time, being afraid of the situation, what we do, we think that avoidance is the best policy. Let me not speak anything, remain silent, and that way avoid conflict and avoid the person itself. But this is not the solution, because it is again said that problems cannot be kept under the rug. Unless and until you actually hint at the problem, it can never get resolved. So you cannot just avoid conflict or run away from conflict. So that is what the basic fundamental or the premise on which we can start discussing conflict. So I just end my address here, and wish that our panelists will focus on how actually we go for a conflict resolution and create a more peaceful and happier India. And while I talk about happier India, the data that perturbs me every point of time, I don't know how many of you are aware of this. India is a country which looks apparently very happy and having some 33 crores of gods and goddesses and having some thousands of gurus are giving pravachans every day and night, but still in the happiness, World Happiness Index, out of 136 countries that has been surveyed, we rank 126, that is from the back it is 11th. And countries like Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan, even Somalia, all these bordering countries, Nepal, where poorest of the poor people are there, they are happier than us. All their ranks are above 100, means they, below 100, like 80, 88, 77, something like that. And countries worldwide, those who are consistently being happy and peaceful are Denmark and Finland. So European countries every time go for a work-life balance. Here, in the moment we say about work-life balance, it is perceived like you are a cheater. So and work from home is also considered as if you are the most productive kind of employee. You always want to work from home or work from anywhere. So that is what most of the, that is what the perspective that Indian managers believe. Indian management believes over time. We still believe in an age where industrial era was actually reigning supreme, and the hire and fire system, there is a fear and anxiety among employees how to save their jobs. Sustainability is a question mark in most of the organizations. So that reduces the creativity, and that further creates conflict between management and employer. Management and employee, which is never a productive factor at all. So if you look at from a broader and long-term sustainability point of view, we definitely need to discuss this topic again and again and find out the root cause and go for the solutions, not only from an individual perspective, but from institutional, from organizational, and from a country level. And this kind of discussion or brainstorming across this country, I think it will definitely help in terms of resolving the issue which is really burning and creating an unhappy India, which is the real state of affair, though it is perceived as one of the happiest and spiritually very enriched country. So thank you everybody.
Thank you, ma'am, for your pearls of wisdom. Really, sustainability, all these are the challenges which we youth are facing. So with this, let us embrace the responsibility entrusted to us and be the generation that paves the way for lasting peace. Together, we can build a future where conflicts are not a barrier, but an opportunity for growth, compassion, and unity, because youth is the hope of our future. So right now, I just want to welcome all our panelists. And of course, I would request Mr. Rahul Banerjee, who is the Managing Director, Raisina House, and co-founder of Raisina House, to just start the session and take over the session. Thank you.
Everyone. So it's an absolute honor for me to be here this afternoon and hosting the Y20 brainstorming session on peace building and conflict resolution. So I will just give a brief introduction. The Y20 is the official youth engagement group for India's G20 presidency. And we at the Y20 in India want to focus, there are mainly 5 main focus areas. Is the future of work, and where we explore the industry 4.0, especially innovation in the 21st century work. The second topic is climate change and disaster risk reduction. The third one is shared future, youth in democracy and governance. The fourth one being health, well-being and sports, agenda for youth. And one of the most important ones that often we tend to miss is peace building and reconciliation, ushering an era of no work. On behalf of my partners, the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports Government of India, and Research and Information System for Developing Countries, that is RIS in India, I, Rahul Banerjee, will take this opportunity to welcome you all for this brainstorming session. And now I think I will just go have a seat and continue my conversation from there. Thank you. Hello. Well, as a young policy planner, I have worked almost everywhere. And as the only youth-led think tank in India, Raisina House, that we do something very closely is policy consultations. And it's not just policy consultation with the government of India or various diplomatic missions and foreign offices. It's also policy consultations with young individuals, young thinkers, emerging young minds who are the future of tomorrow. And that is why this conversation is very important for us. Now some of you might think, why exactly are we promoting youth in peace building and reconciliation? How exactly do we affect peace building? I'm sorry, I have to take this. You can ask for a minute auditorium. I'm sorry, it's hard coordinating and speaking. So if you take a number count around the world, there are about 1,080 crore youth all around. And 90% of them live in underdeveloped or developing nations. Now, among these 90%, almost 600 million youth live in areas affected by conflict or any form of conflict, disaster. It's 600 million. Now, that's a very significant number. But something I've faced during my experience working in Syria and Afghanistan is why the involvement of youth is very important. For example, as in Afghanistan consists of a youth population that makes approximately 70% of the country's population. But when it came to a post-conflict reconstruction and creating an inclusive government, the youth were systematically kept out. And that is the reason, there is a very main reason we see the Taliban taking over back in 2022. So that is why youth participation is important. Now there are various perceptions we youth have created for ourselves, all thanks to us. people usually consider as usually passive victims or active perpetrators. Passive victims or active perpetrators, but an area that we do not that we are not recognized for is our role as active agents of peace. And with this, I will call upon my panel for the afternoon. It's an absolute pleasure to have three brilliant speakers with us who come from a diverse background. The first speaker for the afternoon is Ms. Umi Chanda. Umi is a interfaith peace builder. Please. Sure, of course. Umi is an interfaith peace builder and a doctoral research scholar with University of Wales at St. David. My next speaker for the afternoon is Sagar Gangude. Sagar is the country director for Seeds of Peace in India. Thank you, Sagar. And the final speaker for the afternoon is Ms. Priyanka Bhede. Priyanka is the co-founder and director of director for Kubenan Initiative. Thank you very much. So the format that we are going to follow is we will go for individual presentations, about 8 to 10 minutes each, followed by a round of conversations among ourselves. And definitely we would love to hear what our audience over here has to say. So without wasting any more time, Umi, why don't you go first? Sure.
So while Rahul is setting the presentation up, I just want to add a little more about my background so that you'll know why I've chosen the subject I've chosen today. I trained as a psychologist a while ago. Then I am a culture researcher, and now I'm under the broader umbrella of peace building. I'm focused on interfaith harmony. So I was wondering how I could, sort of align all of those areas in today's talk, and I think I've found a way. So today what I'm going to be talking about is culture and conflict and the role of youth. So, and from there then Sagar will talk about what possible solutions, and then Priyanka will take it forward in terms of activating these solutions through policy, etc. Rahul, are we ready with the presentation?
I think it got switched off somehow.
Okay.
Maybe you can continue introducing a bit of your work. I will get ready with it.
Okay. So, yeah, I think I'll do that. So the first sentence of the preamble to So, okay. Yeah. Rahul is going to take time.
1 minute.
I'm really sorry about this.
Before we continue,
Hi, my name is Ali. I'm from RIS New Delhi. We are a think tank of the Ministry of External Affairs. We primarily specialize in international trade policy. You know, the G20 has given all the organizations a vast array of opportunities to connect with the diaspora, with the civil society for umpteen purposes. Under the several engagement groups that we have, Y20 being one of them. Today I am in Mumbai. You know, I just took a morning flight. We had a session at TIS, and that was about G20 University Connect. So RIS is taking care of 2 youth engagement tracks. One is Y20 and the other being G20 University Connect. Under G20 University Connect, we have covered close to 56 universities across the country. The idea is to connect with 75 universities and take the message, the inclusive nature of G20 to the universities. You know, when I say inclusive, the idea is that we want to reach out to the people. You know, through this session, we are going to report everything that's going to happen and feed it back into the policy ecosystem. So by the end of the G20 proceedings, the policy that comes up with factors in all the comments, all the inputs that come out from the public by large. So here we are, you know, discussing a very crucial topic with Y20. With Y20, we are covering 4 themes. This is probably session number 22 that we are doing. The 4 themes are Industry 4.0, Peacebuilding and Conflict Resolution, Democracy, and Climate Change. So yeah, I hope you all have an interactive session. You know, pardon me for for the delay. I had a speech ready in hand, but I decided, you know, if it doesn't suit the occasion at this point in time, you know, to come up with and talk about, you know, how the the voice of the global south needs to be amplified with the G20 forum. So I think this is good. Yeah. And thank you for all the distinguished guests on the dais. You know, I hope you guys enjoyed the facilitation of the deliberation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Urmi, you asked everyone what they think about culture. What is your perception of culture and also peace?
That's all right. So, culture and peace, the interconnection is to me very, very obvious, because you know, culture is what determines how we name, blame, frame and tame our conflicts. So depending on what we think of as conflict, that will determine what we need in terms of peace solutions. So yeah, that's the connection, and with that, yeah, finally. Okay, can we move on to the next slide? I just put this here to note that I do work with Seeds of Peace. I'm part of Sagar's team. However, here I'm representing Youth for Peace International, which is a Delhi-based youth organization. And my colleague Soumya Agarwal asked me to step in for her. She couldn't travel today. So I'm here on her behalf, on Seeds of Peace behalf, on my own behalf, and as someone who works in this space, as a peace builder independently. Next, please. So ma'am has already touched upon what is conflict and how it can be defined in different ways, how it can be seen in different ways. It's incompatibility, disagreements, discord, friction, hostility, scarcity, differences. It can assume many shapes and forms. It can look like different things for different people. It can mean different things for different people, and hence the kind of solutions that we come up with can also be vastly different. Next slide, please. Here is this, the iceberg model. This is something when when I started studying peace building, I came across this diagram. It really blew my mind. Because, like an iceberg, when we start talking about culture, what we usually discuss, and which is primarily in our awareness, which is the top half, is fine arts, literature, drama, music, culture, games, etc. So, when sports and culture ministry, this is what is usually tabled. But what is out of awareness is what some of you have already pointed out, a lot of things, including, say, conception of beauty, notions of modesty, conception of self, nature of friendship, I'm just picking out random things, notions of leadership, patterns of decision making. So it encompasses a whole lot of thought and behavior and action, which dictates the way we work and live our lives. All right. Next slide, please. So what has culture got to do with conflict? Like I was saying, it is culture that allows us to name, frame, blame, and tame. So whoever we see as the other, in fact, who we see as the other is also defined by culture, right? Who we are, हम कौन है, हमारा क्या है, और हमसे कौन सी चीजें वो हैं जो अलग करती हैं दूसरों को. So that is also defined by culture. And that culture is also something that affects our perceptions, our attributes, our judgments, and our ideas of the self and other. Which is why there's a very deep correlation between culture and conflict, and which is why I'm talking about it today. Before we move on, before we can resolve conflict, we must understand that a conflict is caused because of these things. That awareness, bringing that to awareness is very, very important. It's easy to blame governments, it's easy to blame others for problems, or but how often do we look inside and see what in our culture, what in our thought is causing, us to be a part of a conflict or a part of a solution, right? Next. So here is a chart from the Asia Foundation that talks about certain kinds of visible conflict in India. And we don't have very many visible conflicts. We don't have war. We don't have very, riots are like low. They happen once in a while. Manipur, it's really sad what's happening at the moment. But these episodes are few and far between. From a distance, India looks like a fairly peaceful nation. However, even this chart acknowledges that our communal and ideological conflict is high. So again, it's a war of ideas. A lot of, we are sparring constantly with each other on thoughts and ideas. That's what the communal and ideological conflict point means here. Next. And of course, we have an n number of invisible cultural conflicts. We fight in the name of language, we fight in the name of region, gender, class, caste, and color. We're a highly colorist, racist kind of people, right? And we must acknowledge that. We must first, the first comes acceptance and awareness that we are flawed in certain ways, and only then we can start working towards solutions. And why is culture important? Because human beings are essentially meaning-making creatures. There's a compulsive need among us to make meanings of and attach meanings to things. So you see the symbol on the left. I am not even going to say anything about it. But everyone in this room will have an idea of what that symbol means. It's a cow. That's all I'm going to say. But in India, what does a cow stand for today? That is something we all know. I'm not going to get into that. Culture is also our identity marker. It gives us, it tells us who we are, where we stand, how we dress, who we worship, what we eat, you know, how we talk, all of that. Which is why, again, I'm underlining that culture is important. Next. And who's familiar with this meme? The Adarsh Balak meme, yeah. So this used to be, you know, a lesson that was taught to children in their primary textbooks, the Indian Book Depot. And it has inspired a lot of memes, which says, you know, how is an ideal boy, an ideal child? Gets up early, salutes parents, goes for a walk, prays, and, you know, but it's not just in textbooks. It's a trope that occurs again and again and is sort of, you know, hammered into our heads through our mythology. You see Ram, you see the Pandavas, you see Suraj Badjatiya films, you see DDLJ. So our cinema, our pop culture, our art, constantly there's a reaffirmation of these values. So these are the values of value in Indian culture. Why I'm saying this is because the ideal youth is expected to behave like this, right? Next point. And the traditional narratives, like Rahul was pointing out a little earlier, youth, तो वो है that you know you should be like economic or development resources. So that's one way of looking at it. The ideal youth should be doing these things and he should be a good resource. But on the other side, there's also mistrust. India as a culture does not trust its young people. You know, we are a government, we have a government which is led mostly by very, very senior leaders. There is very little room for youth. Why? It's a cultural thing. बड़ों से ऐसे बात करते हैं क्या? उल्टा जवाब देती हो. This is all also part of our culture, right? The expectation of subordination is there from our young. We don't like our young to question us. So that is where we are placed. And in conflict situations, they are seen as either victims, young people who need support, or as perpetrators. या उधर मचाने वाले. So you know there is this kind of a polarized view about youth. However, next slide. The good news is that culture is not fixed. It changes with time. You know, 50 years ago the way we thought, you know, it's very different from how we think today. Certain things are still there. It's part of a collective consciousness, but things are moving very fast and changing. So while culture is important, culture dictates, culture also changes, which is where, you know, we can make use of, we decide what culture is. And this is my favorite book by Amartya Sen, the title especially, The Argumentative Indian. It defines a very national characteristic. We love to argue as people, you know, and I think it slows us down because we argue a lot. It's very difficult to reach group consensus, but that also sort of acts as a safety net. That saves us because that is what also keeps democracy alive. So by constantly negotiating and talking about culture and driving that change, you know, we are able to change what is already given to us. Next. And that also comes from our history. So here's the irony, you know, that we have certain kinds of role models, which I presented earlier, but then human life, culture, nothing is black and white. You know, we exist in paradoxes. So our culture says that, but our culture also says this. So we have, from our epics itself, you know, Ram hai to we have Abhimanyu also. We have Love Kush also. In our cinema there is positive examples. There's Eklavya, there's Bhagat Singh. So these are examples of really young people taking charge and leading. So अगर culture का ही सुनना है तो ये भी सुन सकते हैं, है ना? We don't always have to be this हाथ जोड़ के अच्छा बड़ों ने जो कहा ठीक है, because there have been people who've broken the rules and who've led things. And we have human resource on our side. 65% of our population is under the age of 35. Young people, which is in the age group of 15 to 30, are the majority of the population. Next slide. More young leaders, so, and this is what we need to do. The median age of the Indian population is 28, whereas the average age of the Lok Sabha members is 57. So there is definite need to change that. You know, if the most of our population is young, then why are most of our decisions made by the old? So there is a need to change that. And the YPS agenda is something UNSCR 2250, 2419 and 2535. These are the resolutions over the period of last 10 10 odd years that the UN has recognized the youth peace and security agenda, and it's pushing towards more and more inclusion so that youth can start driving change. And these are some of the organizations that are leading the way. There's UNOI, which is the United Network of Young Peace Builders. There's Youth for Peace International, of course, Raisina House is there. Seeds of Peace is there, but because Sagar will talk about it, I'm leaving that out. Search for Common Ground. These are some of the organizations, but still very, very few. We need far more people and places where the young can come together and drive change. And I will finally end with this little quote by Pope Francis. You know, a quote which comes from a man who's a religious head, a patriarch, but also extremely progressive. And I found it like, this was like from an article 3 days ago, where he says, he admits that usually adults always complain, you know, कि हमारा ही समय अच्छा था और ये youth तो सब सत्यानाश कर देगा. But the truth is that, and every generation says that, you know, it's not new. But he says we have to recognize in all sincerity that it is the young people who embody the change we all need, and it is they who are asking us in various parts of the world to change. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sagar.
Thank you very much, Urmi, for putting that very briefly. And of course, culture is something that actually builds our, it builds our perception. And to be very honest, perception of youth, not just in India, almost in 80% around the world, is not that positive. Right? And there is something that needs to change, and the change will be coming from us. Before I move on to Sagar, I asked Urmi what is her understanding of peace. So I would also love to hear from you, Sagar. What is your understanding of peace?
Yeah. So I think, hi everyone. My name is Sagar Gangurde, and I work with Seeds of Peace as the country director for India. Seeds of Peace is an international NGO. I'll talk about it in few moments. But to answer this question, Urmi has already laid a foundation where we talk about things like conflict or culture or peace in a very utopian way. You know, like, what is peace? If you may argue on that. Has the civilization, the human civilization, ever attained peace since its inception? The birthing process itself is so violent, and it has so much of so much of struggle into it, inbuilt into it. When you sow seed, the very process of the seed just tearing the land, tearing the mother earth, and then sprouting up itself, it's so violent in its nature, right? So what is this peace that we talk about? And thank you, Rahul, for asking that question. I think it lays a very beautiful foundation to what I'm going to talk about in a moment, about the organization and how we engage youth in various peace building processes. For me, I think peace you can talk about, there is a way to peace, I would say, and peace is the only way. When we say peace, I would bifurcate into two things, which is positive peace and negative peace. So what we experience currently is negative peace, I would say, because you can't see people like killing each other. You know, there's no war going on in Mumbai or in India currently. There are no riots happening, right? So yes, there is peace, but I would say it's a negative peace. There's always an aspirational way to work towards positive peace, and it has different 8 pillars, which basically challenges you, challenges the government, challenging the civil society, challenges the youth, the educational institutes to come together and start working towards it. You know, like ma'am was talking about the happiness index. So there are various indices. There's peace index, there's happiness index, there's press freedom index. How much of freedom of expression you have, how much free flow of information is there, how are the relationship with the neighbors. Alright, so there are various factors to attain peace. And if I say peace is multidimensional, and if we work in each of these dimensions, one day we may achieve peace. So for me, it's always aspirational. So that's how I will put what peace is. So yeah, does that answer your question, Rahul? Briefly.
It does. It actually does.
All right. Okay, so I would use the presentation, so that's why I can talk from here. So, when we talk about the UN resolutions and all, so that's where I think there are 5 pillars which UN proposes in order to drive policies and engage youth in different dimensions. So I would say seeds of peace comes at participation and prevention. It's very important to prevent conflict. All right. So of course, if there's conflict, you need to intervene and stop it. But a better approach is how do we prevent it, and that's where we come in. Next slide, please. So, yeah, so basically how do we then engage youth in different processes? So this is a model that we work with. Basically we build relationships, we build understanding, we build skills, and we inspire them to act. And the 4 key themes that we work on is core conflict issues. The youth should understand what is conflict, what are the core conflicts that we are facing. The Urmi touched upon it. It's not, the border conflict is there, but it doesn't affect us on a day-to-day basis. But the religious conflict, the ideological conflict, the cultural conflict that we are facing, the discrimination, the prejudices, the biases that exist in this society currently, I think it's very important for youth to recognize that and actively engage in that. Communication, how do you communicate? Change making and community outreach and development. How do you take up projects? You create these spaces where youth can actively engage. Next, please. So just keep going. Do you have a slide changer here? No. Okay, so just keep going to the end of the slide. So yeah, so Seeds of Peace is basically an international NGO. So I am not here to basically, you'll start thinking that this is a presentation of Seeds of Peace. That's not my intention. My intention is to introduce a model. So if I ask you, can you name any peace building organizations that you really know of and which really actively engage youth? Can you name? Just shout out if you have heard about just go a slide back. Yeah? Global Forum for Youth, I don't think that's an organization, there could be a forum. So that's where we are. So the point that I'm trying to make is there are none. I mean, there are very few, and if people don't know about it, they don't exist, right? So I'm going to introduce a model here which started in 1993 by a journalist, and he was passionate about conflict transformation. So we are talking about conflict resolution, but John Wallach, who kind of started the organization, believed in conflict transformation. He believed that some conflicts cannot be resolved, but you can transform the relationships where people are engaging in. How do you transform those relationships? So that's what he started the process with. And Seeds of Peace basically starts with an international camp. Since he was from the US, there is a beautiful campus of 25 acres we have. It's deep into the woods. It's nowhere near to a city. And we select youth from Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Jordan, India, Pakistan, US and UK. So if I ask you about, Pakistan, or what is your opinion on Pakistanis? I can guarantee you most of you haven't even met a Pakistani. But still you can write like at least a 2-page essay on what Pakistan looks like and how Pakistanis are. So these different narratives get woven and they get fed to us without us even understanding what's the current reality. How do we move beyond that? So John believed that if I meet the other side, the so-called enemy, and have a very intimate discussion with them, my entire perspective about that nation and about that nationality would change, and I would no longer hate them in the entirety. So that's what happens at the camp every year. Next, please. That's the beautiful lake, and on this shore of this lake, this camp happens. So we select youth from Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Jordan, India, Pakistan and Afghanistan. So these are 15 to 17-year-olds, and they stay together for close to a month. So it's not a 2-day process. They stay together, they share eating spaces, living spaces, and every day they have 2 hours of dialogue. And that's where the peace building process starts. So peace is not something which you just conduct a workshop and it will happen. It needs investment, it needs intention, it needs engagement, and it needs that inner desire to move beyond what's obvious. Alright, so that's what Seeds of Peace does. All these students, when they come together, they really start arguing about the concept that they have heard in their textbooks. It starts from the head. It gets into a debate first. 1960 में ये हुआ था, 1970 के वॉर में ये हुआ था, कारगिल तो हमने जीता था. But the thing is, they soon realize that the textbooks are different. They're opposite. The way Gandhi is portrayed in Pakistani textbooks is very different than how Jinnah is portrayed over here. So that's where the seed of critical thinking starts coming in. So what is history? What is media? All of these questions the youth start questioning about. Next please. Next, yeah, I've already talked about this. So these are the students that engage into this camp. Next. Next, that's how the dialogue happens. It's a very intimate space. Every day 2 hours they really engage into dialogue. Next. Of course, there are different sports and games. Now you will wonder, as I said, peace is multidimensional. You need to build these relationships. You need to teach them the value of coexistence. How do you build understanding with a person without really knowing them? So that's where these are informal spaces where all of these things happen. Next. The different sports that get played. Next. There are different camp activities. We select youth from all across the world who teach them different activities. There's dance, there's drama, there's different skills that they learn. Around 40 type of skills get taught at our camp. Next. 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 There's also like swimming opportunities. There are different opportunities for like kayaking, canoeing, where they bond. Next. There's a interesting activity called group challenge, where Indians, Pakistanis or Israelis, Palestinians are given a challenge and they have no option but to trust each other. So peace also begins with trust. Do you trust the other person? Next. Next. Yeah. Keep going. I just wanted to give you a glimpse of what happens over there. Yeah, there are different international nights, so there's they learn about each other's culture. Next. Next. Yeah. And that's where, when they come back, that's where Urmi and I kind of play a very active role. So if you give them a world view of conflict, like what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Pakistan, and so they understand the nuances of peace building and conflict over there. How is gender perceived in Pakistan? What are the challenges the youth face over there? And with that understanding they come back and we start doing the programs over here. So now that's the moment where they really understand. Now for example, if you ask any school student what is conflict, what's going on, barely they will be able to tell you. But this is so much of layered. Alright? If I tell you that there's so much of conflict, you will say, what are you talking about? But when you sit together, ma'am was talking about different conflict handling styles, avoidance, collaboration, win-win. So it's very important that youth are brought to spaces, we create safe spaces for them and they start talking about this. And how we do it is through the co-leadership program. Next please. Next. So we have been doing this from year 2001 and I'll also talk about the challenges. You will say then, oh, then why no one knows about this work. So Seeds of Peace is operating in India for last 20 years. Go back. Yeah. Go back again. Yeah, forward, sorry. So these are the key programs that we run. So these are three days modules where the first program is Be the Change, where we engage youth in understanding of what is leadership. How do you collaborate? How do you arrive at a win-win? Next is critical, go back. Next is critical media literacy program where you actually take a deeper dive into what media is. Is media only social media or there are various forms of media? How media basically subconsciously programs you. There's subliminal messaging. How it constructs the culture around you. What Urmi talked about. And how do you start perceiving the world in a very different manner? And how do you put that filter over there? How do you become a critical thinker rather than just passively consuming media? So those are the values and skills that we impart through this. And there's other program called humanistic leadership, which is basically how do you move from a culture of violence towards a culture of peace. So all these are three days programs with 8th, 9th and 10th graders go through. So they start viewing the world in a very different manner. Then there's an interfaith harmony camp, which is a 7 days residential camp where we select youth from all different religions. We have Shias, Sunnis, Ahmadis, Daudis, which are basically different sects of the Muslim community. We have Hindus, we have Christians, we have Baha'is, we have Zoroastrians. So different religions come together and we take a deeper dive into what is faith. Is faith only religion, or faith can mean so many different people to so many different things to different people? Like Urmi asked you, what is culture for you? People gave right from values to religion to diversity to different festivals and ideas around that. In the same way, faith is programmed so differently in different people, and that's where conflict arises. So if we create a shared understanding, common grounds for them, so we explore faith and identity, we explore faith and gender and sexuality, faith and religion, faith and nationality, faith and environment, faith and action. So we create a very different understanding of faith, and that's where they start engaging with each other rather than hating each other for being so different. How do we move from tolerating the other towards appreciation of diversity and then further celebrating the diversity that's there? Okay, so that's where this program is pitched in. And we also train youth, like Urmi asked you all, why do we always consider youth as perpetrators or the victims? Why not youth as peace builders? How about training youth as facilitators? How about they coming together, because youth understand their problems better than anyone else. Rather than creating a policy for them, why not include them and create a policy for them? Next. Yeah, there are different programs. Again, I will not go into the details. What I intended to tell you all is like how peace building happens on the ground. It's very easy to come over here and just give a lecture on what is peace, what is conflict, what are the conflict different tools, how do you do negotiation, how do you do mediation. But peace actually starts when you allocate resources for that and bring the youth together and start working with them. Alright, so that's, you can keep going. I think this is all about the programs, and these are some beautiful pictures from, we also did a lot of programs in the pandemic. So if you see all, just go back. So all up, one more back. Yeah, so all our programs are basically co-created with the youth. In none of the pictures you would have seen that I am speaking at them. We always sit in a circle, there are clusters, they are working, there's collaboration, there's active engagement that's happening. Next. Yeah, keep going. That's the interfaith harmony camp. Yeah, we have also started an online dialogue academy, because this type of work really requires resources. Like to get 100 students for a 7-day camp, there's a lot of investment required for that, for 7 days. There are lodging, boarding, transportation, getting facilitators and speakers. But then how do you take this dialogue to more and more people? So we have developed an online platform called Dialogue Academy, where we are now offering it free of cost. Around 300 students have already been through this from India and Pakistan. It's an online 10 hours module where we do mixed batches, 10 Indians and 10 Pakistanis, where they come online, they engage, they understand the language of dialogue, they understand what's diversity, they understand how do you start appreciating each other, how do you appreciate each other's culture, how do you really listen with deep intention. So that's what Dialogue Academy is doing. We are still experimenting with it. It's a 10-hour curriculum. Our objective is to keep experimenting and keep adding different modules. So that's also an opportunity for you. Even you can go through it, I would say. It's a very interesting program which really challenges the different paradigms you have around peace and conflict. Next. Yeah, for youth like you, we have a program called Gather. So if you have an idea, a social idea which you want to really implement, then Gather is an opportunity where they support you, they train you on building an entire plan, which you can, like a business plan where you can monetize it, and also like basically it's social entrepreneurship model. Next. Yeah, keep going. Next. Yeah. So I stumbled, since we are talking about Y20, I have 2 minutes more. Yeah. So since we are talking about Y20 and we are talking about policy making over here, so I just went through the National Youth Policy, which was constructed in 2021 now, and I saw that there are 5 priority areas, but the 5th one is what grabbed my attention, which is social justice. Go to the next slide. If you see the first one, which already talks about building a value-based social fabric, which is the social fabric of India, to reduce acts of discrimination and violence. And if you see, prevent and address cyber crimes that disproportionately affect the youth. So these are certain areas, and I was like really impressed by the language that was used in this. Like, how do you create safe spaces? How do you support them? How do you raise awareness? So it's basically talking about a very advanced way of peace building. Like, how do you create these safe spaces? But when I went to the initiatives, we really fail over there. They're very, very petty, I would say. Like, for example, they have said, we'll engage schools, we'll build a curriculum. But you know, the process of building a curriculum, getting it to the classroom is very tedious. So I think we need a very radical approach where I just presented one model. I am not professing that this is the way to do it. I talked about an online program as well. I talked about working with adults as well. And I talked about working with 15 to 16-year-olds as well. You do whatever. But if these challenges are getting tackled, if there's a strategy where we can include all of these things, I think we will have a way. Next. And this is the most important challenge. There was a wonderful study that was done, not only India, I would say it's a global problem. Only 399 youth-led peace building organizations are there. Globally. So you can imagine how many are there in India. And look at the statistics. Gender balance is very good, I would say. There are 45% female and 55% male. Of course, there is still scope to bring a balance over there. But only 11% have more than $100,000 ka budget, which is like 80 lakh. The balance 89% operate at a budget of $5,000 and less. $5,000 is what? 4 lakh rupiah. Annual budget of this organization is less than 4 lakhs. And look at the volunteering. 97% people just volunteer their time. They don't get paid. And that's how these organizations are functioning. So there's huge scope for us to invest, and that's where my suggestion comes in. Next, which is, how do you include, invest and partner? Not just give them money, partner with youth. Because Urmi has already shared the statistic, 65% of our population is youth. And by youth I mean 14 years to 29 years old people. If I want to give you a better statistics, by 2030, every one person in 4 people, which is 25% of the population, is youth. And all countries are basically envying us. It's such a huge opportunity loss that we are having currently. The youngest nation in the world, which is basically people are getting scared of India right now. And this is the time to act, where we can really invest in the youth, partner with them and include them in different processes, including policy making. It's not just do like tokenism. I am not saying that youth are not included. They are, but in a very tokenistic manner, just for representation. It's high time we change this scenario and really start engaging youth in different policy making. And she also talked about the parliament, the average age, and just one person in the parliament is below 40, I would say, out of so many the members that are there. So yeah, so I think there's a drastic need to change that narrative. And with this, I think I'll invite Priyanka, and then we can go forward as Rahul proposes.
Hello. Thank you very much, Sagar, for putting that. And you actually focused on some very key areas, including the National Youth Policy, I believe that is the draft bill, right? And again, you focused on the areas of education. If you remember, during our preliminary discussions, we were discussing how education can act as a medium of change to create a generation that works for peace, right? And the most important thing is partnering with youth. So something we at Raisina House believe very closely is intergenerational cooperation for policy action, right? Because as the foreign minister recently mentioned in a podcast, we need two generations working together to bring about change. So why not an intergenerational cooperation with the youth? And with this, I move to my next speaker, Priyanka. Priyanka actually brings a very different perspective because she represents the policy field. And Priyanka, I look forward to hearing your views.
Thank you very much, Rahul. And it was fascinating to hear about your work at the grassroots level. What I will try to do is to bring some of those ideas to the policy space, and perhaps the discussion that follows could be where then the solutions could exist, right, between the two. So I'm going to answer your question, which you did not ask me.
I'm sorry, what does peace mean for you?
What does peace mean for me? Yes. And so I'm going to go back to what Sagar said about negative and positive peace. I'm sure all of you who are studying policy would have come across that. It's coined by a Norwegian peace theorist, Johan Galtung. And negative peace is, of course, to not have violence, right? The very obvious, when you think about peace and conflict, you think about very actual violence, and that's not having that violence. And positive peace is then to not to have peace which is more sustainable, right? Which is more long-lasting through your systems, your culture that Urmi spoke about, very important, as well as your structures, right? Your political structures and engagements with the people. So positive peace is, of course, what is at the center of what we are all trying to achieve here. It is also what a lot of the UN principles are built on, because the UN, as we all know, was built to save humanity from hell, right? So, in terms of what then the G20 nations are trying to do is to build this kind of positive peace, and then how do you engage with this large and growing population of youth, right, to make this happen. So a lot of our research at Kubernetes Initiative has been on understanding this concept of a feminist foreign policy, which I will not go into here, but a lot of the things that we look at relate to this population of youth that we are trying to engage with, right, as policymakers, as researchers trying to connect policy to the grassroots. And some of the things that we often miss, that I see are missed in trying to engage with these various parts of the youth population, is that they are all so different, right? That these are concepts that when we look at gender also that come about, right? The intersectionality of it, that all, and it's also a very wide age group that we're looking at, right? Rahul, what is the age group?
Okay, so what Ali has mentioned to me, the youth population is up to 40 years old.
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry for putting you on the spot. But it's 14 to 40, right? So we're looking at not only people that are experiencing life differently because of how old they are, but also at how they're experiencing life differently because of the kind of socio-economic backgrounds that they're coming from, right? So that is one aspect, and that you kind of have to break up when you're looking at the data of what youth exists and how we may engage with them. The other side is gender. Gender is very important, right? Because what you might do with a group of, say, with a group of people in a rural village will differ. The impact, the response will differ depending on whether they are women, whether they are men, and how much access they have to, if it's a technological intervention, how much access they have to technology, how much familiarity, and then depending on the cultural norms, the permission, right, that is allowed. So gender then plays a very important role as well. And the third important aspect to consider is geography, right? Because depending on where the young person is located, they're either perhaps facing direct violence, and so then how they engage will differ very greatly from how a person in Mumbai. Are most of you from Mumbai here? Yes? Or cities? Yes? So how do you think about peace building? I mean, if somebody could, about peace and conflict, right? What is peace building from your understanding? Does anybody have a perspective? This is just to share your own perspective.
No, just to remind, we are in a consultation over here.
Yes.
So just open up and present your thoughts, share your views.
Yeah.
Please feel free to.
Or what is your interaction with peace building, right? It might be, for me, it was through, I started my career as a consultant at the UN, and that's where I came across it, because I also grew up in Mumbai, and I did, of course, except for the riots, active conflict was not a part of my life. So, I mean, if anybody wants to share.
Have you heard about peace building, or like what do you think it looks like, or what does it mean?
But how did you interact with it in your life? When did the phrase come on your radar?
We compromise on certain things. Let's settle down. Let's be happy with whatever we have. And it's a gap between reality and expectation. That leads to disturbance of peace.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yes. So perhaps you on a more at a more interpersonal level, that's where you encountered it. Perfect. Thank you.
I think peace building starts in the family itself. Like when we have conflicts, talking things out and having a conversation with the family members. It starts from the family.
From the family, again, it's very personal, right?
And peace building is finding out the reason behind the conflict and taking the steps that those reasons should not initiate a conflict in future also.
Yes, this is a very important point, and in fact, Boutros Ghali, the former UN Secretary General, in his very famous report, An Agenda for Peace, speaks about that, right? How do you prevent a country from lapsing back into conflict?
It's about finding a state of calmness within yourself and around your surroundings.
A state of calmness, okay, again.
So in a very crowded and urban busy city like Mumbai, the need for peace building even arises in a railway compartment which is so packed with people, and on very small issues there could be a big conflict that may come. So, I mean,
and you're also talking about a very core area, like the commune, the infrastructure of the city, how a city is built.
Yes.
Can also.
Which actually runs, which is the heartline of the city, which allows us to move around and live together and prosper together and develop together. So the core need for peace building is at that level.
Yes, exactly. So there are so many different aspects, right? So I mean, from a very country perspective or from a UN perspective, there are three kind of components to creating this peace building process, right? One is the government and government institutions. The other is, of course, the people on ground, right? The people that we're interacting with, who are coming from a very personal approach towards peace building. And the third is organizations that can then connect what people are thinking on the ground to this at this policy level, right? Because at the policy level, the conversation is at a space where very often perhaps a 14-year-old who's on the lower spectrum of youth may not be able to engage, right? So how do you then create mechanisms for the youth to engage with policymakers in the policy making process? A lot of this actually does happen in our country, right? We do have, for example, we have the Yuva Kendras in states who at the rural grassroots level, they engage with youth to not only kind of do community peace building, They also train them for disaster response and disaster relief. They also then kind of push them towards greater opportunities, skill building and all of that. I wonder there whether they are disaggregating the data that exists, right? That's a space where then perhaps there's an avenue to see who is being impacted and then how could we improve these existing mechanisms. There's also a mechanism to have legal clubs in state-sponsored schools, right? It's a very brilliant idea, and it's also part of the draft National Youth Policy. The policy is fantastic because it touches at a very high level on a lot of things, right? It even talks about mental health, right? So in that sense, it's very all-encompassing. But of course, how do you then put policy into action? That is where the challenge is. That is the gap, right? How do you put policy into action? How do you actually make policies inclusive by including these voices? It's easier said than done, right? How do you then, as organizations also working on ground, make recommendations that policymakers can take and run with? Because clearly this National Youth Policy, this draft shows that at a high level, there are people thinking about these things, about how to make it inclusive, right? But then how does it percolate? How do you then at every level of governance ensure that there is this inclusive concept, that at every level of governance, the people are also trained, right, towards this. Also, there are mechanisms like the Yuva Kendras, but perhaps not enough people know about it, right? How many in this group have even participated in youth parliaments or, any kind of political, only one hand is going up, right? In your own school, right? How do you then educate the youth enough to be able to contribute? So it has to happen in both directions, is essentially what I'm trying to get at, right? And there are many things that can be done from, I think, the policy side. One of the things that we are seeing in the feminist foreign policy, how countries are going about it, is to actually have people across ministries, across departments, who understand these topics, who understand inclusion in this broader way, and then are working with various groups and bringing these ideas in, right? That's one way to do it, right? So it needn't be a whole department that you institute. It could just be people that cut across departments, and essentially their work is to ensure that a gender or inclusive lens or a youth-focused lens is brought into any work that's happening. And at the same time, there has to then be capacity building on the ground for young people. But that also has to happen in a certain way. It's not enough just to expect young people to volunteer their time. And I think it's okay to expect them to do it for free initially because they learn a lot from it. But there has to be a proper pathway that allows them to use this volunteering work to further their career. And this is all there in this youth policy. I think it's just it's a matter of how we are able to execute this. But who should be executing this, right? It is a collaborative effort. The three pillars that I talked about earlier, right? The institutions and the organizations, but then also the people, right? So we have to, I think, come together in that method to see how we can concretely support each other. And for that, there's a requirement for capacity building at both sides of the coin. So I will stop there because also this is it's 5 and I want more questions and more reflections. But I will now hand back.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Priyanka, for putting the policy perspective into place. Now, what I will do, I just have one question each for each of the panelists before we move on to the audience of video. I'm sure they have many questions. But before I ask you the questions, I would know from Ali, what is your perception of peace?
Something that is beyond the actions of war.
Right? That's something wide, but I'll take that. Thank you. Mr. Bhatti, what is your perception of peace?
Oh,
the experts have really shared their views. I just want to raise one question. I would like to have their. Most of us are aware that we must avoid war and peace of Tolstoy. So is war necessary for peace building? I am just asking Dr. Frank opinions about this. Is war necessary for peace building?
Thank you. And we are definitely going to come with it. But before I move on to that question, I have a question for Umi. Recently you concluded a very interesting event. Let's start calling you on LinkedIn for that event. There's anything. Would you like to reflect a bit on that? And we definitely focus on what are the best practices you learned or the lessons you learned from organizing a interfaith dialogue, especially focused on culture. Please.
Thank you, Rahul. It's a pet project, so I love to talk about it. It's something that grew out of my PhD dissertation, a model of interfaith dialogue that I have created that uses syncretic art as the catalyst for dialogue. You see, in the Western nations, interfaith dialogue, in all countries, all continents, religious groups there is fighting between them, right? In the West, it's primarily Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. The three groups are mainly fighting each other. So the Western model of interfaith cooperation has been developed around and by these three faith systems. And because these three faith systems are Abrahamic in nature, in origin, they have a few things that they have in common. So they have common ground. But in the course of my PhD, I realized that that's not a model that is going to work in India. Because theologically, Hindus, who are the majority, are very different from the other faith groups. So then I started thinking of what could be that thing that connects, if not theology, what else? And then the answer was right in front of me. As a student of history, culture, and art, I realized that, we as a nation, we love our entertainment. It's the passionate love of Bollywood is just one way in which it manifests, Bollywood becomes like the epitome of all things we love, there's song, there's dance, there's music, there's poetry, there's acting, there's all of it. So it's just an example, but Indians love art and culture. And Coke Studio, another huge point of inspiration for me. Maybe one place in the internet where Hindus and Muslims and Indians and Pakistanis are not hurling abuses at each other. So inspiring what beautiful art can do. And especially art where both parties find some kind of stakeholdership or, something that is common. You love and you start talking about something only when you have something that you can relate to. So then I took different syncretic art forms I curated over a period of 2-3 years, placed that at the center, and I created an event, a forum, where I would present these works of art and invite people to witness it and then use that as the starting point of dialogue. So an interfaith art cum dialogue forum is what I created, a space for citizens to come together, citizens and artists, use art that is common to both of us. Take for example Kathak. Syncretic means something that combines, that emerges as a combination of two or more systems, right? So Kathak as a dance form, so while a lot of our Kathak performances are about Hindu gods and goddesses, but the music, the attire, the jewelry that Kathak dancers wear are very Islamic in nature, in influence. So there, a Hindu and a Muslim become equal stakeholders in that art form. They both have something to love about it. So then that becomes, because you have something in common, you can start Kathak as a starting point of interfaith conversation. So that's the paradigm. So over 3 days I presented poetry, music, dance, spirituality, and then had dialogue sessions dedicated for citizens to come together and start addressing it. Because whether we want to admit it or not, communal conflict is one of our major problems. We don't like to talk about it. Religion doesn't make for a very comfortable conversation. People educated, especially in the cities, we do not, it's not dinner table conversation. But unless we address it, how are we going to solve it? You can keep pushing it under the carpet saying, no, everything's fine. But everything's not fine. Ask the minority communities today. they are not fine. So, so that was the intention of holding this space.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Urmi, for bringing that, for bringing up Bollywood. And in fact, as you mentioned, Kathak, even music, you know, for example, the Khayal style of music, it is basically adopted from Persia, right, Iran. But the lyrics, if you see, it's mostly dedicated to deities like Krishna. So we as a country, we are not divided at all. In fact, we remain one of the most inclusive countries, especially when it comes to culture. But some place in conflict and, you know, arguments, we've lost that sense. And definitely I believe youth as agents of peace are someone who can definitely bring about that. With that, I will move on to Priyanka. Priyanka, you've been, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. And you spoke about traditional conflicts and how it impacts youth. But what about untraditional conflicts, you know, non-traditional security, for example, climate change? I believe you are doing a very good work in the area of climate security. What about climate change? How does climate change impact youth as well as, you know, affect peace or conflict in region? Please.
Thank you, Rahul. So the climate, of course, is changing the way that people can access resources, right? So that is one point of tension. Climate change is creating several points of tension that we need to be thinking about and prepare for when we think about then peace building, right? And one of the areas is climate-induced disaster, because that's quite immediate. We've all, in this city itself, experienced floods that happen now every year, but there was one big flood that brought the city to a standstill for almost an entire week, right? And in every, I think, regardless of where you are now in the world, you have experienced some sort of climate calamity that has impacted you. So one of the things to think about then is how can youth play a role in peace building in times of climate, right? If you see climate as a calamity and the kind of outcome it has, it's not very different from a traditional conflict, because you have limited resources. It impacts people in different ways depending on what the calamity may be. It impacts women differently, right? Because of their access to water. They're often the people that are responsible for households, for looking after children, and how they then are able to deal with situations of not conflict, but situations that arise out of climate disaster. And then in that vein, the youth also play a very important role. Like how do you then prepare young people to deal with not only the immediate calamity, but also the long-term calamity in terms of how the job markets may change, right? Those kind of factors also then could be triggers for conflict, right? So how do you then build structures that look after that, that look towards that? So that's something that we should also be very actively thinking about when it comes to peace building, is what I feel very strongly, not just the traditional violent peace, right? So to answer your question, I think this is an area where, you know, even in the absence of conflict, this is a different kind of, it's not a conflict, but it could be. And the whole theory and practice of peace building is to prevent one from happening.
Thank you very much, Priyanka. I've got a non-handy one right now. Saga, moving on to you. Thank you very much for sharing that interesting experience about your work. And taking up a cue from that, you know, what are some of your some lessons you have learned by working with youth, and what do you think is the future for youth-led peace building in India as well as South Asia?
I think definitely working with youth, I've learned that youth need a space which they can call it as a safe space, or it's more often called the fifth space, because a lot of spaces that youth are in, be it educational spaces or they are in their homes or, with friends. I think they still wear so many different type of masks. At home, they can't be themselves because there are various expectations. At school or college, they wear a different type of mask. With friends also, not like very close friends, but normal friends also, there's a lot of peer pressure. So I think today's youth needs that one space where they can just be themselves. And I think through my work, that's what I'm trying to do. How do we create a safe, non-judgmental space for youth to just be? And once they are in that space, anything and everything can be talked about. Be it gender, be it what Urmi was talking about, be it syncretic traditions, be it peace building, be it leadership, be it win-win, negotiation, anything that you want can emerge in that moment where they start feeling safe and they can just be themselves. So I think the greatest learning that I have had is how do I equip myself with this ability to create such spaces more and more, be it also online. Like pandemic taught us a lot. Like initially I was very resistant to the idea of creating safe spaces online, but it is possible if there's that intention. So yes, I think that's the greatest learning, and that's what each of our program, the underlying theme is a safe space. If there's no safe space, no amount of peace building can happen over there. So that's what I think it's my greatest learning. And another learning I would say is experimenting with different models. There are different learning styles that each person has. There are like some people are auditory, some are visual, some are kinesthetic. They learn by engaging more. So how do you create programs where all different types, so basically inclusive programs where different types of learnings can still happen. So most of our camps, early in the morning, we are engaging in some kind of a yoga where they are moving around. Then we have something to feed the intellect, where their presentation, their speakers, like for example what we are doing right now. We are carrying a lot of food for thought. We are engaging into an intellectual conversation over here. You're asking questions or you're thinking about what I'm saying. So a lot of intellectual stuff happens in that, where kids who learn through such kind of modality also get engaged. Then we show a lot of different short films or longer films sometimes. Like for example, a documentary called Ram Ke Naam, which basically talks about how the Babri Masjid was brought down. The entire filming of that event that happened. So which basically gives them a very different approach to engage with that narrative. Alright, then there are storytelling, there's art. We do a lot of art. Then I talked about different activities through which we create a conflict situation. Sir said, like, is war always necessary? No, I can create a conflict right here. If you give me like half an hour, I will set you all up in such a way that there's conflict, So that's what we do in our program. So I think initially I used to just organize speaker sessions. It's been a learning curve for me as well. This is 10 years ago when I just entered. As I said, I'm a mechanical engineer. I studied mechanical engineering. Then I studied masters in HR. I did MBA HR. I was working for a corporate, and then I switched my career, into peace building. So I think it's been a huge learning curve, and peace building is all about that, what Urmi brought in. I would say peace building is all about creativity. So how I can be more and more creative in my ways, I think that's the key learning that I've had. And what's the future like? I'm still questioning that, because currently my challenge has been to sustain this work through different kind of resources. So we are always looking for resources. We are always looking for funding. Or like a space like this, for example, we have to go to different schools to there are some schools and colleges who offer their spaces to us where we conduct our programs, because in Mumbai, space is the thing. Like for example, a hall like this will be like 40,000 a day, right? And if you're doing a 7-day camp, you're spending 3 lakh rupees just for the hall. Where will that money come from? So I think I'm still grappling with that. How do I make it more and more sustainable? And of course, there are different foundations where we apply for funding. There are different creative ways in which we can fund this, but I think the government should come together, should join hands, and like Priyanka talked about the 3, like institutions, then organizations like us, and people You know, we have a lot of individual donors as well who basically donate for peace, who actually believe in the concept of peace. So I think more and more how the civil society can come together. Like Priyanka asked you all about peace building, what is the manifestation of that? I was on a program in the US. It was on youth and policy. And there I interacted with a lot of youth groups. And US has a very wonderful debate culture. You know, they have all these parliaments that happen, youth parliaments that happen, where they basically question everything. All the laws and all the policies that are taking place over there have a very inclusive approach, where the civil society is so much engaged with the government, and they come together, they question, and then they create. I think we need more and more of that. So I think, Rahul, to answer the question is that's what my hope. And through whatever work that I've been doing, I am just imbibing those values of critical thinking, of questioning mind, what Urmi started with. We are so afraid of questions. You know, we just want the youth to just take what we are giving them at face value and not to question. Kuch bhi question nahi karna hai, you know. So I think we are just challenging that through the values like critical thinking.
Thank you for putting that very nicely, Sagar. And in fact, you know, you gave the idea of not questioning anything. In fact, I remember during my university days, you know, and I am not a brilliant first bencher. I've always been a rowdy backbencher. You know, my professors used to say that a class is not complete until unless you have an argument with your professor and and there's a new idea emerging out of it. So I believe, especially after interacting with students and young people from almost all over the world, I believe that culture is getting suppressed. The youth in today's time, they are not encouraged to think critically. They are not encouraged to ask questions, and that is an issue, because we do not want to create a generation that accepts anything that is provided to them. We want them to think, we want them to criticize, we want them to come out with out-of-the-box solutions. So my next question probably to all three of you: how exactly can we imbibe that? Sure, you can, of course.
I feel, on the point that you made, that now again, it's again that notion of now things are not going as good as they were. Like, I feel now the youth has a more of a critical insight into things, and a lot of that is actually because of social media.
Of course.
Now, however, we have to harness that this doesn't go towards being a trendy phenomenon, right? It lasts. It has to be sustainable. That aptitude, that appetite for critical thinking should sustain for a longer period.
Exactly.
So maybe how we could come up with mechanisms or curriculum where young students or people who are just young and nimble could accept this as a way of their life. Because the fact of the matter is, by and large in our society, in bigger cities like Mumbai, Delhi, yes, you have. Now we have also reached this stage where kids are even preferring not going to university. Yeah. A very small portion, but that's happening. But in smaller cities, the phenomena is still, that a degree matters a lot, and you have that degree, and the world has completely changed. No one cares about your degree anymore. It's all about the skills that you have at the end of the day. That is that independent thought could only come if someone could think for themselves. Right. One could only think for themselves when they have that critical aptitude within themselves. Oh, let me dissect what's going on. So how do you think we can build curriculums where kids are constantly into this circle of critical thinking?
Thank you very much, Ali, for putting that. And yeah, you actually made a bit of my work easier. Thank you for that. But definitely I would love to hear.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I made my switch into the social development sector through Teach for India. And like, if you ask a kid, like an adolescent, I would say, like 13 or a 12-year-old, like what do you want to be? Okay, there'll be like various answers they'll give, but very few of them will say, I want to be a teacher. And if I ask you, name the best management college in India, the best technology college in India, you will have answers. But if I ask you, give me one premier most teacher training institute in India, or in Mumbai, or in Maharashtra, there will be none. So that's where the challenge is. We don't have any dearth of curriculums, I would say. Yep. A wonderful curriculum was created on adolescence and gender and sexuality and all of that. And it's gone to the trash now. The teachers are so uncomfortable running that curriculum when they talk about where they have not processed themselves their own sexuality. When I got trained as a comprehensive sexuality educator, I had to go through a tedious and a very difficult process for 1 year, where I was trained on how to hold conversations on gender and sexuality. How do you have this conversation? How do you facilitate these conversations? What is that capacity building? It can't happen through a workshop of a day. All right, so I would say there are excellent curriculums that are available. Priyanka shed so much light on the National Youth Policy. Amazing, the words, the language that's getting used over there, I think is amazing. But how do we drive that? It's very easy to kind of say it, create curriculums. You can just hire a bunch of amazing consultants and who have done their PhDs and who have worked in the sector, who can just come and create those curriculum. But I think driving them, that intention, look at the corporatization of education that's happening right now. I think we need more intention over there, more intention and a more vision of what the education should look like, and start really investing with that intention of not like, I work with like all kind of schools, because we have to be very creative about fundraising. So I can't just focus on school from really lower income financial backgrounds. So I also work with elite schools. I work with Dhirubhai Ambani School. I work with Bombay International. I also work with Teach for India schools, where just kids from the daily wage earners come. So I think there's drastic difference in the kind of education that gets imparted in these two different institutions. All right. And that's where organizations like Teach for India are born, with a vision that one day all children will attain an excellent education, and they define what's excellent education. Just like सबके लिए शिक्षा, but what kind of शिक्षा? वो education क्या है? What is the quality of that education? That's not defined. You go to any municipal school, any government school today, and look at what kind of learning is happening over there. And you will be very surprised and you will be aghast, I would say. And I think that needs to change. We need excellent school, we need excellent teachers, and for that we need wonderful training, is like investment into that capacity building, and in the real sense. Okay, and so I think it needs a complete 360-degree transformation.
Yeah,
please.
I have one addition. So, what you said about social media, right, is true. It's given a platform to a lot of people to not only say things, but a platform for there to be a lot of information. And it's not just social media, right? It's the whole internet phenomenon. Now AI is coming in. Yeah. So what is happening now is, for this generation, now if you're taking 14 to 40, if you're in the depending on which side of the spectrum you're on, you either had more experience or less experience. But information is, by and large, the availability of information and access is going to be the same and increasing, just because of the way that we are using technology. So one of the things I think that we should be thinking about is how we then can make space for the experience to happen throughout education. I think the way our education is structured right now is very much at least in India, by and large, and this is, I'm not talking about the IB and the IGCSE schools, right, is that you study, then you work, But that needs to change, because even in the kind of middle class, right, if you take, which is a large part of our population, they do have access to to technology, they do have access to information. So if we can then layer some of that with experience, then I think as a country that would be really...
Thank you, Priyanka. Urvi, you have an opinion on this?
Again, I'll come back to the whole culture shift needing to happen, because a lot of us, I think it probably is a problem because we are still a developing nation, and we are, our priorities are different, and hence plus we have capitalist culture to contend with. So because we are still basically trying to survive, most of us, we are taught to basically mind our own business, not get into apna kya ja raha hai, don't engage, uske usme pad mat. This is how we are brought up. So there's a problem, I feel, where I see it, a value system problem, because the social values of, say, accountability, of needing, wanting, seeking, demanding change, it doesn't come from us very easily, because we're conditioned to just look inside our own little wells, only be bothered with our homes, our families, our careers, our EMIs, our whatever. Khatam zindagi. In schools, how many schools really encourage their children to volunteer because it's a good thing to do, not because it's important for the curriculum or tumko marks milenge? How many teachers tell us to do that? So I think there's a need for culture shift. You all are young. Tomorrow when you all have families of your own, you all must have been pushed कि अच्छा MBA करो, ये करो, बड़ी नौकरी कर लो. But where is the accountability? So because for peace to happen, peace, development, justice, truth, these things are all intertwined. So unless we are invested in our society, unless we feel accountable and want to change things, we want to step into the muck and we encourage our children to do so, things are not going to change. So it's a value system shift that needs to happen, which will happen through advocacy, which will happen through education. Curriculum is yes, one thing, yes. But how many children, how many parents really, even like for 20 years we've been in India, but how many parents actually really want to send their children for a peace education program? क्योंकि क्या करना है? ये एग्जाम में काम आएगा क्या? इसके नंबर मिलेंगे क्या? What's the point? So unless we shift that attitude, it will not happen. But attitude shifting, it's a long-term process. But it starts in a room like this, with a conversation like this. Tomorrow when you have a kid, it may, and a Seeds of Peace sends you a form saying, will you send your kid? Maybe it will ring a bell and you'll send that kid, and the cycle will break. So I think that's where we need
Thank you, Umi. And in fact, Sagar brought about the question of teachers. In fact, we too have a very, a bit of experience dealing with teachers and them sticking to their perceptions and ideas. We at Raisina House, we support Afghan refugee school in New Delhi, and it is funded by the Ministry of External Affairs as well as the Ministry of Culture. So what we try to do after the fall of Afghanistan, we tried to bring about a change in their curriculum, because they used to follow the Afghan Education Ministry curriculum, and after the fall of the government, it was not of use, because the government over there started pressurizing the Afghan embassy over here to exclude the girls, otherwise they will be cutting all sort of funding. So what we did, we approached the Ministry of External Affairs as well as Ministry of Culture, and we tried to bring about an Indian curriculum. But the pushback we faced was from the teachers, because number one, they were not trained in Indian curriculum, and they were a bit drastic into accepting the Indian system. And the second was their ideas and practices. We wanted to do away with some basic and introduce some subjects that we teach in India, for example, sexuality education. But they were not very comfortable with their children who come from an Afghan background to learn those things. Those were biases for them. So definitely teachers' education is very important. And as we are discussing education, why don't Sagar, Urmi as well as Priyanka, why don't you focus on the topic of educating for creating a generation of peace? How can we promote peace education in schools? How can we promote peace education as part of a formal curriculum and not just an extracurricular activity?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we are trying to do. And the formal education is so crowded or cluttered, I would say, that there is no space for such things to exist. you know. I have a wonderful curriculum. It's a 15-week curriculum on gender and sexuality. But when I take it to schools, schools are like, what, 15-week? It's 90 minutes a week, which is like 90 minutes into 15. School like, sir, nahi, ek kaam karo, aap 1 ghante ka lecture kar lo. And you said like the sexuality education, it's non-existent. In India, what happens is a school just invites a doctor who comes and who tells them about hormonal changes, who shows them different contraceptives, condoms and all of that, and ho gaya sexuality education. But if we need a shift, we really need to invest in that. It needs to be taken as what is important. You know, of course, there is a space for formal education, but when we take a collaborative process in which the youth really engage in understanding their bodies, understanding the different changes that happen, and then also to engage into basically informed decision making. How do they become informed decision makers? The same thing is with peace building. The peace education is not anything which is outside. Like I said, I can create a conflict situation here. It's simple, like understanding what is conflict, what is peace, what are the different tools, what is your personal style of handling a conflict, how do you actually listen, how do you actually engage, how do you mediate. We have a wonderful program called Mediation for Young Leaders. We have a tie-up with the Harvard Law School for that. And we do a 4 days program on mediation for leaders. How do you actually mediate in a conflict, a day-to-day conflict? You know, these are the very basic things, you know, which peace education comprises of. It also talks about creating safe spaces. We do something called privilege walk, where kids understand what are the different privileges they have, you know, and how they can be more empathetic and more aware. How do you bring in empathy? How do you bring in understanding? So yeah, so the curriculum is there. I would say there is intention, but there should be more awareness, and people should really make space for it. So I think that's my personal take on this. After like I have 10 years of experience in this, and with that limited experience of 10 years and working with at least 50 schools in Mumbai, I can say this.
Thank you, Sagar. Urmi or Priyanka, if you have a perception or an idea. All right. Thank you. Before we move towards concluding with last comments, definitely we would love to have some questions. Ali.
I was also wondering if there could be added focus over individualism in our society, and more kids, you know, instead of I think someone pointed out that I think you said that, you know, how often do the parents push their kids to study peace studies? How often do parents actually ask their kids to step out of the house and make a life of their own? You know, and what are the systems that are built in this city that make the life easy for that kid to actually go and step out of that city instead of paying that high rent, you know, making navigation within the country more easy, so that once there is more exchange of ideas, exchange of people, that also creates a very peaceful society.
Definitely.
Yeah. And you know, I think we as a society, we really need to start looking at these things instead of the idea of just like, you know, go abroad, and that's a definite yes. There should be more internal mobility. There should be perhaps state-introduced mechanisms that could incentivize mobility. Like how easy is it going to be for someone coming from, you know, probably from Kurukshetra to Mumbai and find themselves an apartment here, and, you know, just so many hassles, right? Yeah, and then you know, you top it out with some politics as well. That just makes it even worse. So maybe, you know,
Ali, you've been speaking about mobility. In fact, I remember attending some meetings, especially with the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, and how they've been speaking about how the ministry is working towards, you know, incentivizing mobility between cities, especially using public transport systems. So these are some issues that needs to be addressed from a policy point of view. But otherwise, I believe India has a very good connectivity. The only problem remains is how easy it is to access those connectivity. I believe that is some place a policy intervention is required.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Policy intervention is required for mobility. I mean, anyone else also here with, who wants to probably ask them a question about how you guys can make a career in peace building, conflict resolution. It's a, share your perspective about it. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question. How can tech and digital tools be used in peace building, and what can be the pros and cons of the same?
Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's already happening. Like, for example, the organization called Safe City, they have a very wonderful app which they map, like if you need, if it basically works on women's safety issues, and if there's, if a woman is feeling threatened by some situation, she can just reach out and click on that app. And so I think, yes, technology is being used. I talked about Dialogue Academy, the online dialogue platform. Like, for example, I talked about the international camp, but it's so expensive to take kids to the US and bring kids from all over the world together and make them stay for a month to have dialogue. Of course, it will be a different experience, but technology is being used. Like in Dialogue Academy, Indians and Pakistanis are interacting for 10 hours, this not like at one stretch, but every weekend 2 hours they are sitting and talking about their culture and different diversity issues and gender issues and all of that. So yeah, so I would say we need more and more into this, but again there needs to be more innovative ways to do it. Currently it's very expensive to build a LMS platform, and I think it's so the cons are that, I would say. The advantages are a lot, but the cons are it's expensive currently to build a LMS system right from the scratch and keep adding different tools, because there are like different players into it now, like Zoom, for example. It's getting more expensive and expensive. I think the more and more we do it, the more it's the economies of scale, basically. A management student will understand that. So yeah, so I think that's my perception on it.
For me, as a journalist, what is your take on it? Especially also we want to discuss about creating online safe spaces and how we can tackle radicalization in the digital space, for me.
So before I come to that, I just wanted to say that also consider what peace building can be, like we said, peace is associated with many other development indices. Freedom, democracy, security, safety, all of these things. If I am not feeling safe, I am not at peace. So, say for example, you may not directly be a peace builder using the kind of terms we are using, but say data breach, Aadhaar, we found out very recently how data of millions of Indians have been put up for sale, the dark web. So, if you're working in the tech space, for instance, are you ensuring technologies that will ensure, say, privacy and safety? And that could also be your way of contributing to peace. Peace doesn't necessarily have to be in these. Of course, we need the vocabulary, because then with the vocabulary comes the intention, which is important. So your contribution as youth to peace building, to conflict resolution, to say prevention of violence. Safety breach, according to me, is a violent act, by whoever the perpetrators are. Gender violence, climate violence, there's so many kinds of violence. It doesn't have to be people shooting guns at each other. So how you're addressing the question of equity in society for as many number of people as you can is your contribution to peace building also. But keep the lens, have the vocabulary, so you know exactly why you're doing what you're doing. So I wanted to add that, which then relates to journalism, prevention of radicalization. Have that intention. As a youth, as a person, a young person, you see someone engaging in radical behavior online, do your duty as a citizen. Stop that chain there. You've committed an act of peace. Don't be cowed by this whole reserve we have. And I know there's a lot of fear because of, there's suppression of dissent. There's a lot of implications the young are, made to feel a lot of fear from what will happen if I say this or say that. But, and having courage to change. Change is always something that will demand a lot of courage from you. And to change what we have in order to achieve peace, we are going to have that courage. So my appeal would be, as a journalist, as a peace builder, as a culturalist, is that have that, safeguard yourself, be smart, but also have the courage to take that step you need to take to build a more peaceful and inclusive society.
Thank you. Would you like to mention?
Yeah, I think Urmi has covered it, but just to reiterate, technology can create a lot of platforms for a lot of people to engage, right? So then the thing that we have to be cautious about is how we are listening to what is being said there, right? Are we aware of the bias that exists? And again, then from the policy perspective, as was said earlier, most of our policy makers, the average age is 55, and this is not just in India, this is globally. The average age of our population is around 28 or 30. So these are people that will have access to this, and then so there need to be several mechanisms for communication, right, between the policymakers and not only the people who are accessing these platforms, but also the people building it. I think to ensure that the tech is used for good.
Thank you. Thank you, Priyanka. And Asha, yeah.
Positive peace and negative peace. So, can you elaborate this on by giving some examples? Exactly what it means.
Like basically, normally when we ask people like what is peace, people will say like there is absence of war. So when there is absence of war and there is peace, that's negative peace. But positive peace, as I said, it's a whole different study altogether. There is an organization called Institute of Economics and Peace, which every year they release a positive peace index. India is 165 on that, where they map. There are 8 categories in which they map. There are like a lot of, but the crux of it is basically, do you have a well-functioning government? What are the levels of corruption over there? How are your relationship with the neighboring countries? What about the freedom of expression? What about the minority rights? How safe are the minorities feeling over there? So they have an extensive study which happens every year. It's you can check it out. IEP, Institute of Economics and Peace. Every year they do the positive peace index, and yeah, so it's a very good reality check, and they also give recommendations where we can work towards it and what is lacking currently, like that. So yeah, so I think it's a whole study which comes out every year.
Thank you, Sagar. I've been repeatedly reminded that we need to close the discussion. So very quickly from 3 of you, your last concluding remarks, and if I may ask you to focus on policy recommendations, and definitely what we have been speaking very much about partnerships. How exactly can we build upon partnerships between organizations, civil society, the United Nations, as well as the government? So I will start with Priyanka, and I will conclude with Urmi.
I think I've already said quite a few in what I've spoken before, but highlights would be to create these mechanisms, right, in communication between policymakers and the youth. And for that to happen, one, there have to be specific, perhaps, offices or people that are appointed to think about this in the policy space of the government, or organizations such as us. We are a policy advisory firm that kind of do the communication between the grassroots level organizations and the policymakers. And second, there has to be more capacity building at the youth level, where we're able to bring their ideas and thoughts in a form that can actually feed into the very complicated process of policy making.
Yeah, I had already shared my recommendation, which is like invest, partner, and include youth. Like don't make policies for them, like what women are saying today. Like how can you make laws for us when we are not there in that panel? In the same way, include youth, invest in them. Don't just look at them as perpetrators and victims, but they can be they are peace builders. And I always use this terminology that youth are not the future leaders, they are current leaders. Like can we go with that notion? And like for example, when we got independence 1947, and Gandhi had said like the youth need to go back to school, and I think that notion needs to change now. He probably what he meant was maybe for 10-20 years, but that thing has not changed yet. We are so much focused on school and college and all of that. No one is coming back to politics, and where politics, this definition, I mean, politics are very beautiful meaning if you just go and research more on it. But now it has become like people will say, oh, politics is dirty, politics is gutter, and we are seeing the results now. Like what is the percentage of youth over there? So I think that U-turn needs to happen now. Youth needs to be more vocal and more involved. Yeah, I think I would just say that based on my experience of 10 years. Yeah.
Okay, two quick things. The NEP has very little scope for peace education. So since, that has been a radical shift in the government trying to change the way education is in our country, I think a recommendation is to make space for more specifically, specific peace curricula and programs in the mainstream. And two, maybe incentivize more forums and spaces where youth can come together and, talk, because like Sagar said, real estate is a problem. So, incentivizing the coming together and creating a culture of public participation, which is not there.
Thank you, Umi. And with this, we come to an end to this Y20 brainstorming session on peace building and conflict resolution, where we try to focus on how can we center youth as agents of peace and bring about peace building and conflict resolution, which is youth-led in nature. I would like to thank my panelists over here, Priyanka, Sagar, Urmi. You were fantastic, and thank you for sharing your insights and definitely your experiences. I will also take this opportunity to thank my partnering organizations, the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, Government of India, and Research and Information System for Developing Countries. And of course, I cannot end before thanking ITM Business School for hosting us, and Mr. Ghate from the World Trade Center in Navi Mumbai for arranging everything and keeping it ready before I arrive. Thank you very much, both of you. And with this, I will hand it over to Dr. Agarwal. Thank you very much.
So as it is said, achieving a world without war. And for sustaining sustainable peace requires addressing the underlying cause of conflicts and engaging individuals in building culture of peace. It is an ongoing and collaborative work, endeavors that demands long-term commitment and cooperation at all levels of society. With that said, on behalf of ITM Business School and Center of Policy Studies, I, Professor Sonal Rao, extend a heartiest vote of thanks to all the speakers present today. Thank you everyone for sparing your valuable time into your busiest schedule for today's event. We had an opportunity to hear your thoughts, and this will surely encourage us to adapt and inculcate peace. Thank you for introducing us with seeds of peace, and also reintroducing us with the new culture, I see. Okay. Thank you everyone. Thank you so much. I request Dr. C.A. Pinky Agarwal to present a token of appreciation to all our guests. Thank you, Mr. Rahul Banerjee. Thank you, Mr. Priyanka Bhide, Mr. Sagar Gangurle, and Ms. Urmi Chanda. A loud applause for everyone. I would also like to thank Mr. Jayant Ghate, Director, World Trade Center, for his collaboration for this event. So please. I request Mr. Ali Syed for his help into this event, for his collaboration into the events. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I would like to thank, you please have a seat. I would like to thank Mr. Nitin Pucha, CEO of ITM Group of Institution, for his continuous encouragement in organizing such events. I also thank our director and campus head, Dr. Lakshmi Mohan ma'am, for being a catalyst that stimulates us to do our best and always standing as our pillar of strength. With a deep sense of appreciation, I extend my gratitude to Dr. Sarit Prabhat Das, Dean of our college, for her thoughtfulness, guidance, and enormous cooperation into organizing such events. I would like to thank Dr. C.A. Pinky Agarwal ma'am, Head of Department of Finance, Head of Center of Policies, for supporting us in organizing such sessions and always encouraging us to learn and grow. Extending my gratitude to all the faculty members present over here and attending this session. For extending also I extend a warm welcome, I'm so sorry. I extend a thank you, I extend a warm thank you note for all the ITM departments. We say it, the IT team, the admin team, for all their support for organizing the events. Lastly, and not the last, but all my participants for their patient listening and for all the cooperation they have given for this event. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Please. Ali, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, half of them can come this.